and lead us toward your people. Use our feet.
One of the biggest attacks that skeptics or atheists have against Christians is the origins of life, whether it be creation or evolution. If one is to claim that they are a creationist, many skeptics will actually just say they're not even a legitimate scientist anymore. And they actually will say, well, Christians are pretty much anti-science, which couldn't be further from the truth. There's actually a great deal of Christian scientists that are out there both today and in the past. In fact, some of the most amazing discoveries that we have in the field of science came from Christians, such as antiseptic surgery from Joseph Lister, bacteriology from Louis Pasteur, calculus, Isaac Newton, celestial mechanics, which was Johann Kepler, chemistry, Robert Boyle, genetics, Gregor Mendel, vaccinations and immunizations from Louis Pasteur. So to say that Christians are anti-science really couldn't be further from the truth. But like the Bible says in Colossians 2:8, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. The battle really rages when it comes to the origins of life. Is it either a supernatural act of God, or was it some sort of Big Bang or spontaneous combustion or something like that that resulted in evolution? And really, essentially, when you get down to it, those are the only two options. The Bible states in Genesis chapter 1, right in the very beginning, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, God has always been, the universe has not. The universe has a beginning, and that used to not always be the thought in the scientific community, but now it's pretty much universal that that is the truth, that the universe had a beginning. So really the battle rages is, when did the universe come into being? And again, there is only two possible options. Either God created or nothing created. The universe sprang up from nothing and evolved. Let me actually give you a few quotes from some leading skeptics and atheists from the past. This is from George Wald, who was actually a Pulitzer Prize-winning scientist, and he says this: the reasonable view was to believe in spontaneous generation. Obviously, he believed in the Big Bang. The only alternative, to believe in a single primary act of supernatural creation. There is no third position. Also agreeing to this point is a man named Robert Jastrow, who happens to just be the founding director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. And he states this: either life was created on Earth by the will of a being outside the grasp of our scientific understanding, or it evolved on our planet spontaneously through chemical reactions occurring in non-living matter lying on the surface of the planet. So essentially what they're both saying is either nothing created or God created, and that is, again, where the battle rages on. Now, some skeptics might argue this and say there's other points of view, but I'm not really sure what else it could ever come down to. As a Christian, most Christians have accepted the biblical worldview of a 6 literal day creation account. However, some studies out there show that actually up to about half the people in the church believe in evolution and old earth philosophies. And they suggest that perhaps mixing the two beliefs is totally fine. They call it theistic evolution. There's other theories like the day age or gap theories. So the question is it okay to believe in an old earth and accept a biblical account of creation? In this video, we're going to discuss that and whether the Big Bang is actually scientific or not. So before we get into some of that, I want to point you to some excellent resources that you can actually go to and look at some creation scientist websites, such as Answers in Genesis, ICR, which is the Institute for Creation Research, or creationministries.org, which is from a man named Russ Miller, who a lot of our information from these videos is actually derived from. So great resources if you ever want to go in and research some of this for yourself. So can we implement old earth theories or Big Bang theories into our Christian worldview? And the answer is no, we can't. Mixing the two beliefs is dangerous because there is only one account of creation. There's only one Jesus, there's only one account, and the Bible doesn't leave open a different option. Okay? If we attack Genesis, we attack the very beginning, we really attack it all. If we don't believe the first part of the book, why should we believe any of it, essentially? See, the Bible teaches us that in the beginning God made a perfect earth. He created people and animals to exist on it. The problem came when people sinned. People brought sin, sickness, death, and sorrow. So God eventually judged the earth with a global flood. Now, of course, in His love, He also had a plan to redeem mankind. Now, you can obviously see why Satan wants to attack Genesis so bad, because what happens is when we take old earth beliefs and we put them in our theology, actually what we end up doing is putting death and suffering before man. And that may not seem like a big deal to some people, but what that actually does is destroy original sin. So you can see how Satan wants to destroy original sin, because if man is not responsible for sin, then he's in no need for a redeemer. Let me just give you a quote from a leading atheist, Frank Zindler, and this is what he says. If there was never an original sin, there is no need of salvation. If there is no need of salvation, there is no need of a Savior. And I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think, says Zindler, that evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. Mixing old earth into Christianity may seem like a plausible thing, and sometimes we may think that, well, the scientific community says this is the truth, so we should conform Christianity to believe it so that we don't look foolish. Well, that's absolutely not the case, and real science is actually on our side. But here's the thing that you always need to remember when we talk about the origins of the earth and whether or not it was a flood or evolution, is we both look at the same evidence. Whether you're an atheist, a skeptic, it doesn't matter, or a Christian, it's not as if we both have different evidence. We're both looking at the same evidence. What it is it's the lens that you use to conclude what the evidence shows. Old earth beliefs state that the layers of rock formed slowly over billions of years, but they are full of dead things that came along before man, and that's what they say is found in the fossil record. As a young earth creationist, we believe that the flood is responsible for the sedimentary layers of rock with fossils, and it wipes out old earth beliefs that the sedimentary layers of rock were formed over billions of years and that man came later. I believe it's really, really important as believers to actually take the account of Genesis literal. It's exactly what it says, and we have no reason to doubt it. Now, you may be thinking at this point, if you're watching one of these videos, yeah, I kind of already know that. Well, what about perhaps your children? What about other skeptics around you? 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is in you. Of course, that means our testimony in the gospel, but these are things that we need to know, because if we send our kids to a public school, for example, they're going to get thousands of hours of lies about million-year-old earth or billion-year-old earth and evolution and different things like that. And so we need to show them credible answers before they ever are introduced to these things. So here's what the other side chooses to believe. And when I say chooses to believe, I believe that a lot of people choose to believe in the Big Bang and evolution because they don't want to be responsible to a supernatural creator. Some just think, of course, that science shows it, and they don't actually know that for a fact. They're just told that. But I believe that there are people out there that know that this really doesn't hold up to science, but they choose to believe it because they want to be able to deny a creator and do what they want. In fact, Romans 1 hits on that. In verse 18 it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them. For God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." That passage goes on to talk about some other stuff, but basically what it's saying is that just looking around, we can see that creation testifies as a creator. It is not some sort of supernatural mistake. I think that too many people just want to stay in their sin, and if they choose to believe that basically we're a cosmic accident, there really is no purpose to life. However, a lot of them will tell you, no, that's not true at all. There is enormous evidence to support evolution. Well, again, it's not that their evidence is different, it's the same evidence. You can't change the fossil record. So what is it that they believe? Well, there are some variants in what they believe, but basically it comes down to this. Nothing created everything. Some of them are going to argue and say, well, there's a lot more to it than that, but essentially that's really what it comes down to. Nothing created everything. Well, and if you don't take my word for it. This is the Big Bang Theory according to NASA. This is what it says. When the universe began, it was just hot, tiny particles. Notice how they didn't say how it began. It was just hot, tiny particles mixed with light and energy. Doesn't say where the light and energy came. It was nothing like what we see now. As everything expanded and took up more space, it cooled down. The tiny particles grouped together, they formed atoms. Then those atoms grouped together. Over lots of time, atoms came together to form stars and galaxies. The first stars created bigger atoms and groups of atoms called molecules. That led to more stars being born. At the same time, galaxies were crashing and grouping together. As new stars were being born and dying, then things like asteroids, comets, planets, and black holes formed. How long did this take, according to NASA? Well, we now know that the universe is 13,800,000,000 years old. That's a very long time, says NASA. That's pretty much how the universe began. Because it got so big and led to such great things, some people call it the Big Bang. But maybe a better name would be the everywhere stretch. What do you think, they ask? I think they didn't give me any answer whatsoever as to how the universe began. They just said basically the universe was here to start with. That's not science. That's absolutely a theory, and it really doesn't hold up to science. Essentially, this is what they're saying. Nothing blew up, created a rock. We came from a rock. We were basically a single cell that turned into a fish, essentially, that breathed with gills, and in order to get up on land, it had to develop lungs. And once it got up on land with its lungs, it was by itself, so it had to mate with itself, and every living thing that we now know of came from that one living cell. And that's more believable than God created. So how do they go about showing this stuff? Well, they show you science books and different diagrams and pictures and things like that. The problem with that is what you're always going to find is pictures. You're never going to actually find an actual fossil or something that truly shows how this happened. It's drawings and stuffings and exhibits. Now, some might think I'm being religiously biased. Well, is there actual scientific evidence to refute the old Earth and the Big Bang theories? Absolutely. First and foremost, for starters, the Big Bang is impossible according to the law of biogenesis. The law of biogenesis is a scientific law that has never been broken. And this law states that life can only come from living matter. In other words, life can't come from non-life. Non-living matter cannot produce this. And that has absolutely never been broken. In order for the Big Bang to actually be scientific, it would have to first and foremost break the law of biogenesis. So that's one problem. The Institute for Creation Research actually gives some other problems. There's an antimatter problem. Every time scientists attempt to convert energy into matter, they get equal amounts of matter and antimatter. Antimatter particles have the same mass but opposite charge. Supposedly, the Big Bang converted energy into equal amounts of matter and antimatter, but the universe shows no sign of this antimatter. There's also the problem with the mature galaxies. Light from the furthest galaxy supposedly took billions of years to travel to Earth. Those galaxies should be undeveloped and chaotic, but they are fully mature and beautiful, unlike what the Big Bang predicted. Another problem is the horizon problem. The Big Bang states that the universe started out very small and expanded rapidly. Yet this would leave huge hot and cold spots because even the false assumption that the universe is 13 billion years old would not be enough time for temperatures to level out. Yet there is a remarkably same throughout all directions consistency in the temperature throughout the universe. There's no hot and cold spots like that they would think would happen. The Big Bang, of course, needs billions of years, and it contradicts the Bible by putting the sun and the stars before the earth. The Big Bang just flat up cannot stand up to actual science.